is kind of between the, archery and muzzle loading. Takes a lot of attention to detail from what I've been learning over the last couple of months here as we prepared for this. But I want to go back. You told me a really interesting story about how you got into air guns, and actually has something to do with my home state of New York. So if you don't mind just recapping that real fast, I think that's it's always fun how the good Lord works and puts those little things in our path, right? That just put us on a really interesting journey in life. So tell me about coming to upstate New York to find your first.
Well, it's a funny thing because I hadn't thought about it for a while, but you mentioned you were from upstate New York, and I was about 8 or 9 years old. I came from a divorced family. My mom wasn't into guns. My grandfather had been a hunter, but he had died by then in my life, and I was asked to go with my great grandmother across country on a Greyhound bus. I don't even know if those are still running, but she was afraid to fly, and it was going to be 3 days, and they didn't want to send her. She seemed exceedingly old, but she's probably not that much older than I am now. And they wanted me to go with her cross country. So we went out to my uncle's house in upstate New York in Cuba. You mentioned Cuba was near where you went to college.
Yeah.
And I was out digging around in an outbuilding on his property. And I found this BB gun, a Red Ryder, and it happened to belong to my cousin who was over in Vietnam at the time. And my uncle said, yeah, it was all rusted. He said, clean it up. If it still works, you can have it. I'm sure your cousin doesn't mind. And so I took that gun and I went out hunting everything I could hunt with a BB gun. Sparrows weren't safe. It's politically incorrect now, but I was shooting sparrows, frogs, anything that moved with it pretty much. And I brought that back with me. And from then I was kind of hooked on shooting. And I went through the regular thing that guys, at least in my generation, did. I shot the BB gun, then I got a Sheridan multi-pump, and then I got a 22, a long rifle, when I was probably about 13 years old, 12 or 13. And that was it for the BB gun. I didn't shoot a BB gun again or an air rifle for a long time. But then I moved to Europe after college, and a few years moving around through the States. I went to Europe. I moved to Europe, and I was there for about 12 years. And it was funny. I had an invite to hunt with a surgeon I was working with in Vienna, and went out to his family place, and we were hunting roebuck. And he asked me if I wanted to shoot an air gun. And he brought out these spring piston guns. They were I think they were Diana, as I recall. But these had these fine Tyrolean stocks on them. They're just amazing guns. And I shot those, and not that long after that, I found Airgunner magazine at Schiphol Airport when I was flying out. I was living in the Netherlands when I was flying out. And there was a guy named John Darling. He's the father of airgun hunting, I think. In terms of riders, he definitely is. And I started reading all this, and I went out and bought some air guns. I lived in Holland. I couldn't hunt there, but I started shooting them. And that's what really got me back into air guns. So it's just, that was my start in New York. Then there was a hiatus for several years, and then I kind of picked up on them again in Europe.
Right. So when did you, talk to me about your journey though into becoming a writer? And as a writer myself, it's always, that I love hearing those types of stories too, because it is a hard world to break into. And especially the one thing that is kind of neat though, is that you put your flag into the ground as that was going to be your specialty. I'm probably too general. I just like telling stories and hearing stories, right? So talk to me about that journey though, to when you really decided, like, okay, I'm going to make this my thing.
Well, you said when I broke into it, I fell into it. And what happened was that when I got back from Europe, I was only back in the States for about 4 years before I left again and went back overseas. And I was in Australia and South Africa for a long time after that. But during those years I was back, I started shooting with my air guns. I was using those more than my 22s, and I lived in the high desert in California. So I started going out all the time. I worked about half time I was overseas and half time I was in the States. And when I was home, I didn't have to do anything. So I went hunting almost every day, and started using my air guns more and more. And so then I left and I came back. And when I came back, I picked up the air guns again. And about that time, things were getting started on the internet. Some air gunning forums were popping up. And so I didn't know there were other people that were hunting with air guns in the States. So I started talking about it. But in the meantime, I'd been traveling all over and taking my air guns with me. So I had all these stories from all the places I went, and I would write about those in the forum. And there was a guy named Randy Mitchell. He's a Baptist minister in Kentucky, who had one of the first air gun hunting websites. And he contacted me on the forum and said, "Hey, Jim, your story's really good. Why don't you write something for my forum?" And I said, "Okay, I'll write some stories." And I did that, and people started saying, "Well, you ought to write a book." So I wrote a book, The American Air Gun Hunter. That's where that came from. Okay. And that's what started everything for me. And I wrote that book, and it went out and did pretty well. It was being sold in a lot of the air gunning shops and online. And I started my website just to sell the book. And so that's what's the first time I really wrote something out there outside of internet postings. And magazines started coming. First, companies started coming and saying, "Well, can we send you some guns to try out and report back?" And that's kind of where I evolved this thing of, well, yeah, if you send me a gun, I'm not going to say anything about it if I don't like it. If I like it, I'll write about it.
Right.
So that started, and then magazines started hearing about air gunning, and they wanted somebody who was somewhat articulate and knew the air guns. And somebody told them they should talk to me, and I talked to the editors at Predator Extreme. They said, "Well, we only want to do this for a couple issues, maybe a couple articles to see how it goes." And after the first couple, they said, "Well, this is really getting a lot of interest and really popular." And I've got to hand it to Predator Extreme. They were the first U.S. magazine, kind of mainstream hunting magazine, that started doing something regular with air guns. And I've been writing for them for, 11 or 12 years now, I think. Okay. But once that started getting all these other invitations, so a lot of people go through the heartache of submissions and having to struggle. I started getting magazines coming saying, "Would you write a couple of articles for us?" And it went from there. And as mentioned when we talked before, there was a time I was really into the freelance writing, and I was going around and looking for it. I don't work that much at that anymore. I like writing. We can talk about that. I like writing in some ways more than video. But it's harder to find the places that you can write for, that you can submit to. It's a lot of work without a lot of return. I started writing regular columns for Predator Extremes, regular column for Air Gunner in the UK. And there are a couple of magazines that, they come to me when they decide that they need that content. I'm their Air Gunner guy. So I still write for those, but I've started putting a lot more emphasis in the video for my YouTube, and I still do the TV show, the broadcast on American Air Gunner.
Right. Yeah, I hear you on the freelance side of things. I would love to, personally, I would love to get in, have a column someday. And but when I asked one of my editors about it one time, I think it was the NRA, she's been great to me for years. She goes, those are kind of reserved spots, in the magazine. And I'm like, all right, I get it. I've only been around for a decade, so I guess I gotta grow up a little more.
Well, but your point is a good one. That when they first came to me, they didn't have a lot of choices. I mean,